a Polish nurse knocking on doors in the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942, asking Jewish parents to give up their children so she could smuggle them to safety. This was Irena Sendler's impossible mission. She saved 2,500 Jewish children through methods that should have been impossible. When the Gestapo caught her in 1943, they broke her legs and feet, trying to force her to reveal the children's locations, but she never talked. Irena's disguise as an infection control nurse was only the beginning of her ingenious operation. She used her papers as a Polish social worker, combined with papers from a member of the underground Zagota, who worked in the contagious disease department, to enter the Warsaw Ghetto. Typhus was raging, so Polish nurses were allowed past the ghetto walls to disinfect houses. She arrived early in the morning when the guards were changing and security was slightly lax. She flashed her permit and strolled inside. Once inside the ghetto's nightmare, Irena faced the most heartbreaking decision imaginable: convincing terrified parents to give up their children. She knocked on doors, asking parents and grandparents to hand over their children and grandchildren so that she could smuggle them out. A 29-year-old woman in a nurse's uniform, standing in a doorway, asking Jewish mothers and fathers to entrust her with the children they were desperately trying to protect. Many parents refused, unable to trust that their children would survive outside the ghetto walls. But those who said yes witnessed Irena's network spring into action, with methods that seemed impossible. She used 5 main escape routes: ambulances with children hidden under stretchers, trolleys carrying children in sacks, trunks, or suitcases, sewer pipes, and secret underground passages. The old courthouse on the edge of the Warsaw Ghetto as a smuggling route, and churches in the ghetto with exits into the free zone. Infants were given a drop of sedative on the tongue to prevent them from crying. Older children were placed in coffins and told to act as if they were stricken dead with typhus if anyone peeked inside. Others slid into burlap potato sacks, heads poking out just enough to breathe, and were carried out by garbage crews. Some children were taken in one door of a church in the ghetto and emerged through another door in the free zone, exiting with new Christian identities. If a child could speak good Polish and rattle off some Christian prayers, it could be smuggled through the sealed entrance and later taken to the Aryan side. This was very dangerous, since Germans often used a ruse to trick the Poles and then arrest them. Every single rescue depended on split-second timing and nerves of steel. Every route was a gamble, as German patrols were unpredictable, and forged papers could be questioned. One frightened child could jeopardize the entire operation. Irena couldn't work alone. She and her network of 10 core compatriots, supported by a larger group of 20 to 25 mostly women operatives, used many methods to smuggle children out. Between 1942 and 1943, Irena and her network rescued 2,500 Jewish children from the Warsaw Ghetto. The price for helping a Jewish child in wartime Warsaw was execution, and Irena and her operatives risked their lives daily to save each and every child. But Irena understood that rescue was only half the mission. Each child was given a new Polish name and forged identity papers and hidden in foster homes, orphanages, or convents. She insisted that lists of the children be kept, documenting their Jewish and Polish names, so that after the war they would know their original identities. Irena carefully noted the true names and family members of the youngsters in code and buried the list in jars under a neighbor's apple tree, hoping to one day dig up the jars and reunite the families. She sealed the lists in milk jars and buried them in the backyard of one of her co-conspirators. This meticulous record-keeping was an act of faith in a future that seemed impossible. In the wrong hands, these documents would have been fatal to Irena, the others in her network, and to the children they saved. Each buried jar contained not just names, but the hope that families torn apart by Nazi brutality might somehow find each other again. By October 1943, some 2,500 children's names were in the jars. But the Gestapo was closing in. German authorities had begun to suspect that someone was systematically smuggling children from the ghetto, and they were determined to find out who. Irena's impossible mission was about to face its most dangerous test, one that would push her courage to its absolute limit. Given everything Irena risked to keep those buried jars secret, would you have been able to stay silent under Gestapo torture to protect 2,500 children's lives? Drop your answer in the comments below, because what happened next would test every ounce of courage she had left. On October 20th, 1943, Irena was arrested by the Gestapo and dragged to Pawiak prison, the most notorious prison in Warsaw, where almost no one emerged alive. A woman who ran a laundrette used as a resistance drop-off point had been captured and tortured, ultimately breaking under interrogation and revealing Irena's name. The Gestapo arrived at her door in the middle of the night, knowing exactly who they had found. The Gestapo repeatedly tortured Irena for information. Despite the agony, Irena never said a word. They shattered her legs. They crushed her feet. Jagota knew that if Irena were killed, then 2,500 Jewish children would never make their way back to the Jewish community, because nobody knew where the coded files were hidden. The stakes were impossibly high. Reveal the names and locations, and thousands of children would die. Stay silent and face execution herself. Very quickly, Irena received a death sentence. She was taken to another location on November 13th to be executed by firing squad. But Jagota did everything to get her out. On the day Irena was to be executed, members of Zagota bribed one of the Gestapo agents, and she was permitted to escape. Officially, however, she was listed on public bulletin boards as among those executed. Irena assumed a false identity and continued to help the underground rescue operations, although she was forced to stay out of sight for the remainder of the war. Irena's escape from death was miraculous, but her story faced an even more insidious enemy: deliberate erasure. After the war, Poland's communist government persecuted members of Poland's wartime resistance, Zagota, of which Sendler was a part. They were harassed, interrogated, imprisoned, and even executed. Irena and others who rescued Jews during the war kept silent. Almost no one knew of Irena's heroism. Poland went from German occupation to Russian communism in quick succession. Polish rebels became criminals, and these incredible humanitarians never told their stories. For 45 years, the woman who had saved 2,500 lives lived in poverty and obscurity. She would have remained an unsung hero were it not for a discovery that would crack open the silence about her forgotten legacy. In 1999, 3 teenage American students planning a National History Day project found a brief reference to Irena in a U.S. News and World Report article entitled "The Other Schindlers." They learned that a Polish woman named Irena Sendler had saved 2,500 lives, more than twice the number Schindler had saved. Yet the world had never heard of her. These students, from Uniontown High School in rural Kansas, wrote and performed a play called "Life in a Jar" that retold Irena's story in dramatic form. The title referred to the lists Irena had buried. When they discovered she was still alive and living in Warsaw, they traveled to Poland in 2001 and formed a friendship with the elderly woman who had risked everything for children she had never met. Through their play and advocacy, these teenagers accomplished what 45 years of communist suppression could not destroy. They restored Irena Sendler's rightful place in history. After 375 presentations of Life in a Jar, a website with tremendous usage and worldwide media attention, a motion picture, and the award-winning book Life in a Jar, the Irena Sendler Project, Irena's legacy was finally known to the world. The nurse who had saved 2,500 children was finally saved herself, not from torture or execution, but from the cruelest fate of all, being forgotten. Subscribe for more untold heroes who changed history, and watch this next. It goes even deeper.